They asked me to tell the truth. After 60 years of silence, they sat me down with a microphone and a camera, and they asked me to tell the truth about what happened in those woods outside Bastogne. I looked at that young interviewer with her clean clothes and her digital recorder, and I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream, because the truth isn't something you just tell. The truth is something that lives in your chest like shrapnel, working its way deeper every year, until you can't tell where the metal ends and your heart begins. My name doesn't matter anymore. I was 23 years old when I learned that survival isn't a gift, it's a sentence. December 1944, the Ardennes Forest. We called it the Ghost Front because nothing ever happened there, until everything did. I remember the cold first. Always the cold. It wasn't like winter back home in Pennsylvania. This was a cold that had teeth. It crawled inside your boots and lived in your bone. We'd been dug in for 3 weeks. Just my squad and the endless trees. I can still name every single one of them. Big Mike Kowalski from Chicago, who'd been a butcher and never let us forget it. Davey Morrison, just 19, who cried the first time he had to use his bayonet and pretended he didn't. Rodriguez, Haxon, O'Brien, Fisher, Paulson, Henderson, and Winters. And me, 12 names. That should mean something to somebody. The morning it started, the fog was so thick you couldn't see your own hand. That should have been our first warning. Nature knew something we didn't. I was on watch, smoking the last of my cigarettes, when I heard it. A sound like distant thunder, except thunder doesn't come in rhythmic pattern. Thunder doesn't make the ground shake in waves. I grabbed my rifle and started yelling before my brain even understood what my body already knew. They hit us with everything. Artillery came first, screaming out of that white fog like the voice of God's fury. The trees exploded around us. Not broke, exploded. Splinters the size of your arm flying through the air like javelin. I dove into the foxhole with Tommy, Chen, and Big Mike, and we pressed ourselves into the frozen mud while the world came apart above us. Mike was praying in Polish. Tommy was calling for fire support on the radio, but all he got was static and screams from other positions getting overrun. Then came the tanks. We heard them before we saw them. Engines growling through the fog like mechanical beasts. Panthers and tigers, the kind of armor that could shrug off everything we had. And behind them, the infantry, grey ghosts, moving through grey fog. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The entire German line had come alive, and we were directly in its path. Lieutenant Morrison, Davey's older brother, was screaming orders. Hold the line. Fall back. Hold the line. Fall back. He couldn't make up his mind, because there was no good answer. Every choice was death. We fought from that first foxhole for maybe 20 minutes, before a mortar round landed right on Henderson's position. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of Henderson but his boots, still standing upright in the hole like he'd been raptured out of them. We ran. God forgive us. We ran. Not in formation, not in any organized retreat. We scattered like animals into those frozen woods while German machine guns chewed up the snow behind us. I saw Fisher go down, clutching his stomach, screaming for his mother. I saw Rodriguez take a round through the throat, drowning in his own blood in the middle of his Hail Mary. I kept running. That's what I did. I kept running while my brothers died. 6 of us made it to the rally point, a bombed-out farmhouse 2 miles back. Me, Tommy, Big Mike, Johnny, Davey, and O'Brien. Half our squad gone in less than an hour. We huddled in what used to be someone's kitchen, gasping and shaking, while the battle raged on all around us. Davey was crying again, but this time nobody pretended not to notice. Johnny kept saying, "What do we do? What do we do? What do we do?" over and over, like a broken record. Big Mike just stared at his hands, which were covered in someone else's blood. Lieutenant Morrison never made it. We found out later he'd stayed behind to cover our retreat. Him and Winters. They found their bodies 3 days later, frozen in fighting positions, surrounded by empty shell casing. Heroes, they called them, but we were the ones who lived, and that's a different thing entirely. The farmhouse had a cellar, ancient stone walls, probably older than America itself. Tommy got the radio working long enough to make contact with battalion headquarters. The news wasn't good. The entire line had collapsed. The Germans had broken through in a dozen places. We were cut off, surrounded, and headquarters' official order was to hold our position and wait for relief. When that relief would come, they couldn't say. Maybe days, maybe never. That's when we heard the first screams from outside. Not battle screams, something worse. We crept to the shattered windows and looked out into the twilight, and what we saw made my blood turn to ice water. The Germans were marching. American prisoners passed the farmhouse. Maybe 40 or 50 boys in brown uniforms, hands on their heads, stumbling through the snow. And behind them, an SS officer on a motorcycle, casual as you please, shooting them one by one in the back of the head. Executions, right there in the open, against every rule of war, every convention, every shred of human decency. We watched those boys fall into the snow, one after another, while their killers laughed. While their killers laughed, Davey raised his rifle. Big Mike grabbed it, forced it down. "We can't," he whispered. "There's too many. We'd just die too." And he was right. That's the thing that still haunts me. He was absolutely right. There were maybe 200 German soldiers out there, and 6 of us. The math was simple. We stayed hidden. We stayed quiet. We stayed alive. And 47 American soldiers died in that field, while we watched through broken windows and did absolutely nothing. When it was over, when the last body had fallen and the Germans had moved on, we sat in that cellar in complete silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. We just sat there in the dark with what we'd seen, what we'd failed to do. That's when Tommy Chen said the words that would change everything. "We have to tell someone when we get back. We have to report this." And Lieutenant Morrison wasn't there anymore to make the decision. So the choice fell to us. We stayed in that farmhouse cellar for 3 days. 3 days of cold and darkness and the sound of German patrols passing overhead. We ate frozen rations and melted snow for water and took turns on watch while the others tried to sleep. But none of us really slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those prisoners falling. Every time I started to drift off, I heard the sound of that SS officer's pistol, methodical and casual, like he was just doing paperwork. On the second day, Johnny found the bodies in the barn. Civilians, a Belgian family who'd owned the farm. Old man, old woman, 2 teenage daughters, executed just like our boys, lined up and shot, left to freeze in their own barn like they were nothing, like they'd never laughed or loved or mattered to anyone. The daughters couldn't have been more than 16. Davey threw up. Then he sat in the corner and didn't speak for 12 hours. The radio crackled with news when Tommy could get it working. The offensive was massive, the biggest German attack since 1940. The whole American line was in chaos. Entire divisions were surrounded. Bastogne was encircled. Nobody was coming to get us anytime soon. We were on our own, 6 ghosts haunting a dead house in a dead country, waiting to see if we'd still be alive when the war remembered we existed. That's when O'Brien started talking about the interview. Before the war, he'd worked for a newspaper in Boston. He knew how these things work. If we make it back, he said, they're gonna want to do interview. War heroes and all that. They're gonna want us to tell them what happened out here. So we tell them, Tommy said. We tell them about the massacre. We tell them about the SS. We make sure somebody pays for what happened to those prisoners. Big Mike shook his head. You don't understand how this works. We start talking about war crimes, about how we hid and watched Americans die. They're gonna have hard question. Why didn't we engage? Why didn't we radio it in immediately? Why didn't we try to save them? Because we would have died, Davey whispered. That's why. And do you think that's going to be good enough? Mike shot back. Do you think they're going to pat us on the back and say good job surviving? Or are they going to ask why 6 American soldiers let 50 Americans get murdered without firing a shot? The cellar went quiet because we all knew he was right. We'd made the smart choice, the tactical choice, the choice that kept us breathing. But it wasn't the heroic choice. It wasn't the choice that would look good in an interview. It wasn't the choice that would let us sleep at night. So what do we do? Johnny asked. O'Brien lit a cigarette, his hands shaking. We keep our mouths shut. All of us. We don't mention the prisoners. We don't mention the massacre. If anyone asks, we got separated from our unit during the initial attack. We holed up here. We waited for relief. That's the story. That's the only story. That's lying, Tommy said. That's surviving, O'Brien countered. You want to go home and face a court-martial for cowardice. You want your family to know you hid in a basement while Americans died. Because that's what they'll call it. That's what it'll become. Not a tactical decision. Cowardice. I remember the weight of that moment. The way the darkness seemed to press down on us. The way we all looked at each other, trying to decide what kind of men we were going to be. What kind of men we could live with being. We take a vote. I heard myself say democratic. Majority rule. And whatever we decide, we all stick to it. All of us. Nobody breaks rank. Ever we voted in the dark. 3 for telling the truth. 3 for keeping the secret. A perfect split. And since there were only 6 of us, there was no tiebreaker. We sat there in that stalemate for what felt like hours, until Big Mike finally spoke. I'm changing my vote, he said quietly. We keep it secret, because if even one of us goes down for this, we all do. And I didn't survive this hell to get court-martialed by my own army. We made a choice. We live with it together. That changed the vote. 4-2. Tommy and Davey wanted to talk. The rest of us wanted silence. And that should have been it. That should have been the end of the discussion. But then we heard the truck. German voices outside. Engines idling. Boots on frozen ground. We grabbed our weapons and moved to the windows. A supply convoy had stopped at the farmhouse. Maybe to rest, maybe to scavenge. 12 Wehrmacht soldiers, tired and cold, with 2 trucks full of ammunition and supply. Not SS, regular army. Just soldiers like us, doing a job, following orders, trying to survive. We can take them, Johnny whispered, element of surprise. We can take them and get their supplies. Maybe even one of their trucks. It was insane. It was also our only chance. We were out of food, almost out of ammo, and if we didn't get out of here soon, we'd either starve or get caught. This was the opportunity we'd been waiting for. We attacked at dawn, came out of that farmhouse like devils out of hell, firing from cover, using every dirty trick we'd learned. The Germans never had a chance. We killed them all. Every single one. Some of them weren't even armed when we shot them. Some of them were just cooks and drivers. But we killed them all. Because that's what war is. That's what survival is. And then, in the back of one of the trucks, we found him. An American pilot, shot down, captured, beaten, half to death. They'd been transporting him to a POW camp. He was barely conscious. But when he saw us, he started crying, thanking God, thanking us, calling us hero. We got him out. We got him into the truck. We loaded up the supplies, and we drove through German lines. Somehow, miraculously, and we made it back to American positions 3 days later. The pilot lived. Command gave us bronze stars for the rescue, for our heroism, for our courage under fire. They never asked about the prisoners in the field. Nobody knew to ask. We'd buried that secret under 12 dead Germans and 1 rescued American. We'd buried it so deep that even we almost forgot it was there. Almost. The interview happened 6 months after the war ended. A journalist from Life magazine. She wanted to do a piece on ordinary heroes. She picked our squad because of the pilot rescue. She sat me down with a photographer and a notepad, and she asked me to tell her about the war. And I looked at her, this kind woman with her eager eyes and her American optimism, and I knew I was going to lie. I knew I was going to tell her the story we'd agreed on, the safe story, the heroic story. But something broke inside me when she asked the question, "What was the hardest thing you experienced during the war?" I told her about the cold. I told her about the fear. I told her about watching my friends die and not being able to save them. I told her about the farmhouse and the rescue and how we de-risked everything to save one American life. I didn't tell her about the 47 Americans we let die in the snow. The article came out 2 months later, 3 pages in Life magazine with photographs of our squad looking proud and strong in our dress uniform. The headline called us the Angels of Bastogne. They interviewed the pilot we'd saved, and he called us the bravest men he'd ever known. They sent copies to our families. My mother framed it. She hung it in the living room, right above the mantle where everyone could see it. I never looked at it, not once, because every time I tried, all I could see were those prisoners falling in the snow. All I could hear was the sound of that SS officer's pistol. All I could feel was the weight of my own silence, crushing me like artillery falling on a frozen foxhole. The others dealt with it in their own ways. Johnny drank himself to death by 1952, just gave up, climbed into a bottle, and never came out. Big Mike moved to Alaska, as far from people as he could get, and lived alone in a cabin until his heart gave out in 1967. O'Brien went into politics, became a city councilman, spent 30 years serving his community like he was trying to balance some cosmic ledger. Tommy Chen went back to his girl, married her, had 4 kids, and never spoke about the war again. Not even to his own family. Especially not to his own family. Davey Morrison ate his service pistol in 1959, left a note that just said, "I'm sorry." His wife found him in the garage. She never knew what he was apologizing for, but I knew. We all knew. And me, I kept the secret. That's what I did. That's what I'm good at. Keeping secrets. Surviving. I went to college on the GI Bill, got married, had 3 children and 7 grandchildren, built a successful career, became a pillar of my community, coached Little League, served on the church board, did everything right, everything respectable, everything heroic, and every single night for 60 years, I've seen those prisoners fall. Every single night, I've heard that pistol. Every single night, I've asked myself the same question. What kind of man watches his brothers die and does nothing? What kind of man accepts a medal for heroism while carrying the weight of his own cowardice? The journalist who did that 1945 interview, she's dead now. So is the pilot we saved. So are Johnny and Big Mike and Davey. So is everyone who was there that day, except me and Tommy Chen. And Tommy had a stroke 3 years ago that took his memory. He doesn't even remember the war anymore. Doesn't remember the farmhouse or the massacre or the vote we took in the darkness. So I'm the last one, the last keeper of the secret, the last one who knows what really happened in those woods outside Bastogne. And that's why I'm telling you now. Not because I want forgiveness. Not because I think it'll help me sleep, but because someone has to know. Someone has to carry this truth forward, even if it destroys everything people think they know about heroes and courage and the good war. We made a choice, a human choice, a survival choice. We chose our own lives over the lives of men who were already dead. We chose silence over honor. We chose to be survivors instead of heroes. And maybe that makes us coward. Maybe that makes us monsters. Or maybe it just makes us human. I don't know anymore. I've spent 60 years trying to answer that question, and I'm no closer now than I was in that frozen cellar. What I do know is this. The war didn't end in 1945. Not for me. not for any of us who came back carrying secrets too heavy to share. The war follows you home. It lives in your chest like shrapnel. It waits for you in the quiet moment. It whispers to you in the dark, and no amount of medals or magazine articles or heroic stories can make it go away. They called us the greatest generation. They said we saved the world. They built monuments to our courage and sacrifice, and we let them. We stood there in our dress uniforms, and we accepted the praise, and we kept our mouths shut about what we'd really done, about what we'd really seen, about who we'd really been. Because the truth is, we weren't all heroes. Some of us were just scared kids trying to survive. Some of us made choices we can never take back. Some of us carried secrets that ate us alive from the inside out. And some of us, like me, lived long enough to see everyone else die before finally having the courage to tell the truth. 47 American soldiers died in that field outside Bastogne. Their names are on the wall at Arlington. Their families mourned them as heroes. The army listed them as killed in action. Casualties of war. Brave men who gave their lives for freedom. Nobody knows they were executed. Nobody knows they were massacred. Nobody knows that 6 American soldiers watched it happen and did nothing. Until now. Until this interview. Until I finally opened my mouth and let the truth fall out like shrapnel, working its way out of an old wound. So that's my confession. That's my war story. That's the thing I've carried for 60 years. The thing that's heavier than any medal they ever gave me. I'm not asking you to understand. I'm not asking you to forgive. I'm just asking you to remember. Remember that war is more than glory and heroism. It's also shame and survival and impossible choices made by terrified boys in frozen foxholes. It's beauty and horror all mixed together until you can't tell them apart anymore. It's doing terrible things and calling them necessary. It's living with the weight of what you've done and what you've failed to do. That's the truth. That's the war. That's the interview that revealed my deepest battle scar. And now it's your burden too. Listen, if this story moved something inside you, if you felt the weight of it the way I've felt it for 60 years, then I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a like, because these stories, the real stories from the men who were there, the stories we've kept buried for too long, they need to be heard. They need to be remembered before the last of us are gone and all that's left are monuments and myths. Subscribe to I Was There W2. Keep these voices alive. Keep this truth alive, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurt, because that's what they would have wanted. That's what those 47 men in that frozen field deserve. The truth, always the truth.